Well, welcome to the DBR podcast. We are getting this thing together about an hour or so, an hour and a half after the brackets were announced. Duke is obviously a #1 seed. I know a lot of people had been doubting it. I was never in any doubt. We are #1 in the South. Before we get to the bracket thing, I'm going to bring in my co-host this week, my partners in crime, Donald Wine. Say hello to everybody.
Hello to everybody.
Thank you very much, sir. And Sam Klein, thanks for joining us as always.
Hey, how's everybody doing?
Good. By the way, I'm JasonEvans. I forgot to mention that part about it.
Oh, so, hey, Jason.
Yes.
How's it going?
It's going great because Duke's a #1 seed, and we always like it when Duke is #1 seed. So let's start by looking at where Duke is in the South. Donald, let me put it to you. Were you surprised that we got a #1 seed? There was some doubt out there. And tell me, just big picture really quick, what do you think of the bracket for us?
So first of all, I wasn't surprised that we got a #1 seed. I thought we would be the 4th overall seed and be placed on the side of the bracket with Kentucky. But, I like the fact that we're on the other side. And I like the fact that our bracket at first glance was probably the best possible bracket we could get, with our top seeds being in a pod with Virginia and not UNC, which means that those pale blue fans will be far, far away from us. And I think that is something that I was looking for. I'm glad to see that UVA was strong enough to maintain a #2 seed. And looking at our bracket, I don't see teams that really scare us in the South. There's some Iowa State is hot right now. They won the Big 12, but they're also in the other side of the bracket. Gonzaga, who probably in my mind was the weakest 2 seed, is in our bracket. And I'm looking at St. John's and San Diego State, and that's I think those 2 teams are a favorable matchup. They're both tough opponents, but I think we have our hands full in a way that we are the #1 seed, and everyone's going to be taking their shots at us. But there's not really any teams that are worrisome to me at first glance.
I think I agree in general with most of what Donald said. I thought that his point about UNC not being in Charlotte is actually a way bigger deal than it might appear sort of at casual first glance. I don't know when the last time you guys attended a Duke first round NCAA tournament experience or first weekend NCAA tournament experience, at a site in North Carolina that UNC was also at, but the crowd is often 90% plus in the pale blue. So this time, the fact that it's the Cavs there with us and not the Heels is great for us because we won't have the whole stadium rooting against us all weekend. And we may have a tough first round opponent. So that actually could come into play for us. But I also like our draw. I think that there are some interesting teams in our bracket. I look at Utah and I look at Iowa State as both teams that have some potential, but nothing on the order of Virginia having to play a Michigan State in the second round. In their bracket, Wisconsin getting a few tough teams in Baylor and Arizona and North Carolina, frankly. So I think that we got a pretty favorable draw. I'm happy about it. And I look for some pretty interesting matchups in our region. Georgetown has a lot of talent. I mentioned Utah, Iowa State. Davidson is always an interesting team in the tournament, and Bob McKillop, I think, has done a very good job with them this year. But overall, I don't think we could have asked for a better placement. And the key that I think I saw, I can't remember who was mentioning this on Twitter or if it was somewhere else, that one of the things that was key for Duke was that we had beaten head-to-head Virginia and Wisconsin, and so our seed was improved by having those head-to-head wins. So one of the things we've been touting all along, the strength of Duke's resume is those head-to-head matchups, those head-to-head wins against other top opponents, and it looks like that worked out very much in our favor when it came to this bracket creation.
Yeah, I'll add something to that, which is I heard someone who used to be on the NCAA seating committee. I think a guy who used to be chairman of it or something like that. I was reading an interview with him, and he said the committee's far more interested in hearing about who you have beaten and who you can beat than who you lost to. Yes, there are bad losses. There are games out there where teams lose a game committee goes, ugh, that looked kind of bad. But they're much more interested in talking about who'd you beat, where'd you beat them, was it a road game, was it a neutral court game? And Duke, obviously, in that regard, had a resume that was absolutely unparalleled. There's no one in the country that comes close to the resume Duke had in terms of road victories against really top tier teams. As we see, Wisconsin's a 1, Virginia's a 2. We beat both of them in their home arena. So when I heard that a couple days ago, I sort of said, now again, this is not a guy who was currently involved with the seeding process, but he has been in the past. And I said to myself, that's a dead signal that they're going to talk about Duke and they're going to say this is a 1 seed. So I wasn't all that surprised to see us get the 1. And I echo what you guys said. I think that this bracket shapes up very, very nicely for Duke. Yeah, there are a couple teams to be worried about here and there. To me, the biggest one I worry about is Iowa State. But aside from that, I look at this bracket and, like look at the 4 seeds and 5 seeds who are the teams that we'll play potentially should we get there into the Sweet 16, assuming there aren't a lot of other upsets. I look at the other 4 seeds, Maryland and North Carolina, I think are both significantly better than Georgetown. I look at the other 5 seeds, not Arkansas, but West Virginia to me and Northern Iowa especially are way better than Utah. I don't think very much of Utah at all. So as I look around at the other brackets, I say Duke did really well here. We didn't get a top tier seed in any of the seed lines, other than maybe I think San Diego State might be the best of the 8s. I really like San Diego State. But you know what? Before we get to that, there's a first round game, or I guess the NCAA calls it round 2, which is the most stupidest asinine thing I've ever heard of in my life.
We're back to round 1 this year. I think this year they've reconciled their issue and are now back to calling it the first round.
They call it the second round. I think that takes place next year. The old.
It'll right itself soon. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
My mistake.
Yeah. And round 1 is when there are 64 teams. Oh my God, NCAA. It's anyway. But before we get to that second round matchup that we were just talking about, we have the winner of North Florida and Robert Morris. Donald, was it you that had a look at North Florida?
I had North Florida.
Tell us a little bit about North Florida. Prepare folks for whatever that may be, should they be the team that wins.
Okay, to prepare for North Florida, we need to abandon the paint and guard the perimeter because everybody on North Florida shoots threes at a greater than 35% clip. It sounds like from my quick research, they spread the floor basically just by putting everybody on the perimeter. Their offense is just them passing around the outside. They have a few guys on the team that average over 2 or 3 assists a game and a lot of good shooters. They're led by a sophomore guard named Dallas Moore, who hits almost 40% from 3. They've got a wing player, Bo Beach, who's 6'8", who hits 37% from 3, and they've got a couple guys that are averaging like 5 or 6 rebounds a game. So they have a balanced attack in that a lot of guys are scoring on their team, but they are doing so exclusively from the outside. So we probably, if we have to see North Florida, we will probably not be seeing any of that 2-3 zone. I expect a lot more close matchup play, and it'll be interesting to see how we utilize Jahlil Okafor because he's really going to be at a disadvantage on defense if all their players are standing outside the 3-point line, where he's going to struggle. But look for Quinn Cook and Justice Winslow to really be key to stopping North Florida. They were the Atlantic Sun regular season and tournament champions this year, and this is not only their first appearance in the NCAA tournament. They've only been Division I for 10 years, but this is actually their first winning season. So you can imagine that the Ospreys from North Florida are going to be excited to be playing in this tournament. But we'll see if they can get through Robert Morris. Which of you guys was previewing Robert Morris for us?
Jason is raising his hand. I had a look at Robert Morris. And your description of North Florida, that's a pretty good description of Robert Morris. They are a team that loves to shoot the 3. They love to shoot from the outside. Robert Morris, and by the way, their nickname is the Colonials, the Robert Morris Colonials, from the Northeast Conference. They're pretty good from 3. They hit 38% of their 3-pointers. They're a fairly quick team. They get about 8.5 steals a game, which is a very good number. They've got 3 guys, 4 guys, 5 guys who are all shooting 3-pointers, but really it's primarily three guys: Rodney Pryor, who's a 6'4" junior, Marquise Reed, who's a 6'3" freshman, and Lucky Jones. What a great name! That is a really good name, Lucky Jones, who's a 6'6" senior guard. He's a guard, but he's really like a small forward for them. Both Jones and Pryor take more than 5 3-pointers a game. So their offense, much like the way you described North Florida, Robert Morris's offense is bombing away from deep. They are, by the way, a very poor rebounding team. They only, we really learned about the concept of offensive rebounding percentage when we talked about Carolina this year and how Carolina grabs, mid to upper 40% of their misses that they then turn into an extra possession. Robert Morris grabs 31% of their misses. That's their offensive rebounding percentage, which is not terrible, but not very good. Their defensive rebounding percentage is just 64%, which is atrocious. It's among the lowest in Division I. That says to me that especially Jahlil Okafor and Justice Winslow, Emil Jefferson, we're going to be hitting the boards hard, and I think we'll probably do very, very well offensive rebounding against them should we face them. And Sam, I know you had a look at San Diego as we start to move on to the second round matchup, but let me ask you first, do you think the fact that we're playing a team that will have played a game just a day or two before, is that going to have you think that has much of an impact? Does that give us a little extra advantage here playing a play-in game?
Yeah, and I don't think I can't remember the last time we had this particular situation. Obviously, we've only had the multiple play-in game participant thing going on for a couple of years now, and I don't think we've had one recently. But it definitely helps. We get to scout these teams live in their most recent game, so that certainly helps. And we're going to be more rested. Obviously, we had a bunch of injuries kind of going into the postseason. We bowed out of the ACC tournament a little earlier than I think we would have liked. So hopefully that means that our guys are going to be fresh by the time Friday rolls around, which is when the Charlotte Regional happens. So I definitely think that's an advantage. And also those other teams are going to have to travel. I believe they play their first round game in Dayton, and then the winner has to then come to Charlotte to play us. So yeah, it's definitely an advantage. I should have also added, because I was doing North Florida. Their coach Matthew Driscoll was an assistant at Clemson in the late 90s, and he left like in the early 2000s. So he has seen up close and personal what a really nasty Duke team can do to an opponent. So you can bet that he's prepared for that and is not going to be shy with his players about what it takes to beat a talented Mike Krzyzewski team. So that was interesting. And then the other thing I forgot to mention was that North Florida is a school in Jacksonville, so maybe they're mad that Grayson Allen didn't go there. So they've got extra motivation to beat Duke, who beat them out for Grayson Allen in recruiting. I can only imagine. I really have not paid attention much to Atlantic Sun basketball until today. But I think Donald has San Diego State for us. So why don't we let him tell us about SDSU?
I do have San Diego State, and the Aztecs were first in the Mountain West during the regular season, and they were the number one seed in their conference tourney, getting to the final and actually losing to Wyoming 45-43 this past weekend. But it was an awful game by all stretches. It was tough to watch. But the main thing about them is they don't score a lot of points. They score about 62 points per game, which is 305th in the nation. But that doesn't mean that they can't score in a shootout or be in a shootout. They've been in a couple, but mostly they pride themselves on their defense. They are second overall in the nation in points allowed per game at 51. I believe UVA is number one. So it's going to be kind of a similar game to the one that maybe we saw in Virginia and Charlottesville, with it being a low-scoring game. They pride themselves on their defense, and going up against a team like us, which is actually one of the higher scoring teams in the nation. So it'll be an interesting matchup in that end. They have three guys that really score points. Winston Shepard, he's a 6'8" freshman forward, and Akil Quinn, I'm sure I butchered his name, Akil Quinn, 6'3" senior guard. They lead the team with 11.1 points per game. And J.J. O'Brien is a 6'7" senior forward, and he is just behind those guys at 10.1 points per game. They don't have that many people that can score. Other than that, they are terrible from the line as a team. They shoot 62% from the charity stripe as a team, which basically means that we're going to see there's only one guy, Winston Shepard, that likes to get to the line, but he's not that good at the line. They are also, and I hate to bring this up, they also are not good from three-point range, unlike the teams that we will see in the first round. They are 32% from three as a team. They don't like to shoot a lot of them, or as much as other teams that we've seen this year that don't put the ball in the basket from behind the line that much. So they don't shoot a lot of threes, but when they do, they end up being terrible. They like to go inside. They like to shoot a lot of two-pointers from the free throw line. And I think that is where we're going to have to defend very well on the interior with and I think one guy who's going to be a main matchup problem for San Diego State on our team is Emil Jefferson. I think he would be the one that if he has a good game, he is going to destroy San Diego State with their defense.
My comment on San Diego State, you're right. They've gotten in a couple shootout kind of games where they scored a lot of points, but I really wonder how they're going to keep up with Duke and succeed in scoring at the pace that Duke scores. You look at some of their scores. They lost to Boise twice. They lost to Boise State, and they scored 46 points in each one of those games. They lost a game to Wyoming where they scored 43. They lost a game to Washington where they scored 36 points. 36 points, that's maybe a half. That's a bad half for the most part for Duke. They've got games they won where they only scored in the mid to low 50s. I mean, their most impressive win on their resume is a win they had over Utah. Utah's a pretty good team. They beat Utah 53-49. 53-49.
Those are awful basketball scores.
Yeah.
They're terrible scores.
One of their other really impressive wins, they beat Colorado State 56-43. I just look at San Diego State. I do respect the how hard they play, and there's no question that they are a very disciplined defensive team, and they will present challenges for Duke. But oh boy, I can't imagine even Virginia couldn't keep Duke into the 50s, and I'm not sure that these guys are going to get to 70 or so, the 60s, 65, 70, 75 that you need to even really be competitive with Duke. I don't see it.
Oh, I was going to mention that. Other than the BYU game that they played, that went to double overtime where they scored 92 points in Maui in their first. I think it was their first game in Maui. The most that they've scored in a game this season is 79 points. So they really like to drag the game down. They like to slow it down. And they like to, they like games that are in the 50s and 60s. Unfortunately for them, if they're going up against us, we like games in the 80s. So they're going to have to figure out a way to put points on the board against us.
I was going to say that San Diego State and also their first round opponent, St. John's, are both coached by guys who have played against Duke a lot and who know what it means to play against Duke, not unlike North Florida's coach, Matt Driscoll. San Diego State's obviously coached by Steve Fisher. So he's been around the block a few times playing against Duke in big games, and he knows what it takes. So I wouldn't bet on San Diego State or St. John's, if we get a chance to play one of them, sort of being lackluster or lacking the attention to detail that it takes to beat a disciplined Duke team. So that's something to watch for is a really big coaching matchups that are potentially going to happen in this pod.
Well, Sam, you brought up St. John's, and that's who we need to talk about next. And for the folks who haven't heard, Chris Obekpa, who is St. John's best interior player, at least defensively, he's the guy who matched up or tried to match up with Big Ja earlier this season. He's their force in the middle, and he's been suspended for 2 weeks. I sort of think 2 weeks is optimistic because I don't think St. John's is going to last 2 weeks without, Obekpa helping him out in the middle and protecting the rim. But Donald, obviously we know St. John's well because we played them in a pretty important game back in January that just happened to be Coach K's 1000th. Tell me your feeling about potentially facing them for the second time.
Well, I agree with you when you say that Obekpa was the guy that they tried to throw at Big Ja in the middle. So with him being out, it opens up the floor a lot more for him. I don't think, the guys that they have are the other guys that they have on a team quite compared to, matching up with Ja. And I think it was most of Ja's points came with Obekpa on the bench a couple minutes in the first half and second half. So I really see it's going to be a similar game. Hopefully we don't have the ups and downs of the runs like we had in January in New York, where we had basically, I think we were down 10 at one point, and then we came back, and it was back and forth for the rest of the game. I'd rather not take a lot of heart medication if we play St. John's again. But I think that we are a tougher team than we were back then. I think we're a better team, obviously, and I think we would, we shouldn't have any problems with them.
I really think that we have changed a lot since we played them. Obviously, that game was in mid-January, and Rasheed Suleiman was still on the team. And that was also the point in the season, if you guys remember, that Justice Winslow was going through whatever broken or bruised rib problem that he was having. He was limited in that first game.
You stole what I was going to say. I was going to bring up the very point talking about them.
Well,
they haven't seen the real Justice Winslow.
Yeah. So in the first game, Justice Winslow only played 10 minutes. Matt Jones played 24, and I think now the sort of version of our wing rotation with Winslow starting next to Matt Jones and then Grayson Allen coming off the bench is a much better version of the wing rotation that we had in January, which was Rasheed Suleiman getting a lot of shots and Matt Jones also coming off the bench, and Justice Winslow obviously being hurt. So I think it's going to be a very different game in that regard. I think that Okafor is going to be able to take advantage of whoever they're going to try to throw at him without Obekpa. So I really like this matchup for Duke. I think that the way in which we beat them last time is only going to be enhanced by the improvements that we have seen from mid-January now to mid-March. But Jason, did you have anything to add about St. John's?
Well, the one thing I would add is that, I'm not sure, as much as we're saying they didn't see the real Duke because we've changed so much, I'm not sure that we saw the real St. John's, because D'Angelo Harrison, who's far and away their best player and one of the better players in St. John's recent history, had a pretty poor game against us. He was 5 of 14 from the field, and he's a better shooter than that. And I think that if St. John's thinks they have a better shot in this matchup, assuming they get past San Diego State, I'm sure they're thinking that they're going to be far better from the perimeter than they were in that game. They hit 26% of their three-pointers in that game, and St. John's is usually a fairly decent team from the perimeter, from outside, and I imagine they would hang their hat on the fact that it was a very good, very competitive game, at least until the very end, and they had a nice lead, until they started missing all their three-point shots, and that if they face us again, they think they'd have a better showing, and certainly they would think that D'Angelo Harrison would shoot better than 5 of 14 from the field. So we do need to worry about that, but I go back to missing Obekpa is huge for them. He's their shot blocker, and without him, and again, he didn't get to play all that much against Big Ja because he was in foul trouble so much. Okafor went for 17 and 10 last time. With Obekpa not there to check him, I'm not sure who they'd put on him. I mean, their backup center is Joey De La Rosa. Jalil will go for 30 if Joey De La Rosa plays 25, 30 minutes against him. And he may go for 30 no matter who they put on him. So I think it's a really, really tough situation for St. John's if they manage to get past San Diego State. And I think that's a game where I really feel like San Diego State's going to win. They're a better team to me than St. John's.
I was just going to add that sort of the most intriguing thing, or one of the most intriguing things about watching Duke, especially in the last 2 months, has been the evolution of the way that we have played defense, and that Coach K has been so willing to change the defensive structure from game to game. And I think that the potential teams that we can face in this first weekend, we see a few different styles, and so I'm interested to see again sort of how that defensive evolution continues, and if we can slow down the sort of different game plans that will be thrown at us in this first weekend, because I think we've sort of summed up that all the teams that are in Duke's Charlotte pod. None of them are going to be as talented as Duke, but they all have very specific ways that they like to attack you. And so it'll be interesting to see how Duke responds to that.
Absolutely, I completely agree. It'll be an interesting weekend, and to some extent, the best game of the weekend in that pod is probably going to be the anticipated Virginia-Michigan State matchup. I think Michigan State is clearly playing way better than they were earlier in the year, and if I had tickets to Charlotte, that'd be the game I was really looking forward to. And by the way, I think Michigan State will crush Georgia. I think all SEC teams suck. It's not because I hate Kentucky. It's because I think the SEC was terrible this year, and probably Georgia didn't even deserve to go to the dance. I bet if you put Georgia in the ACC, there's no way they're winning half their games this season. So, all right,
so
enough
Jason,
of my.
Do you have Wofford over Arkansas as your 12-5?
Oh man, I'm looking hard at that one. I'm looking hard. By the way,
super hard.
I'm bummed that Bobby Hurley and Buffalo got West Virginia, because I think West Virginia is a very, very tough. West Virginia's just got too many athletes, so that's a really tough matchup for them. But yeah, my 5-12 that I like the most is probably Arkansas falling to Wofford. SEC die. Y'all are awful. You're just not a basketball conference.
Also, one final note that I wanted to mention about Duke, and this is a hat tip to my friend Jeff. If we win a game in this tournament, it will be our 100th NCAA tournament win.
Ooh, that's impressive.
Cool.
That is impressive.
Nice.
That's a big number. And who has the most? Any of you guys know?
Probably Kentucky, right? I would guess.
I think
maybe Kentucky,
I want to
Carolina.
Say Kentucky.
I mean, we got to be up there. I don't
Carolina.
know. We should
Kentucky's
do some
got the most wins all time.
Oh, did you check that? Do you know that?
The most.
I know. Well, no, Kentucky has the most overall total program wins. But I don't know what the tournament success is. They were really good in the mid '90s, and then they weren't as good in the 2000s when there were there have been more tournament games. You would want to say UCLA, but UCLA's tournament dominance was when there were only 4 rounds or 5 rounds in the tournament instead of 6.
Yeah, well, and UCLA, the total number of UCLA wins in the past decade is probably 6.
Well, they had those Final
10?
Fours. They had those Final Fours with Kevin Love and Russell
That's
Westbrook.
true.
But
Yeah.
in general,
Russell Westbrook, yeah.
Yeah, but maybe 10?
Yeah.
What do you think? 10 UCLA wins in the past decade? Maybe a little tiny bit more, but I mean, a number that's going
to. Let's keep guessing at facts that we can easily look up.
Yes, great idea. Great idea.
Well, we know Coach K has the most wins of any coach overall, and I think he's at 80. So we might actually be at the top or right near it.
Okay, well, we're making fools of ourselves at this point, because people out there are probably Googling. They hit pause.
That's what we do every week. That's the sort of analysis we bring you. It's foolish.
Exactly. Hey guys, I want to go back for just a moment to an ACC tournament that I think a lot of us are bummed, because we really wanted Quinn Cook to get a title, and it's been a while since Duke has won an ACC tournament. And this is another fact I could have looked up to see when was the last time. I think it was 2010, but I could be wrong. But regardless, it didn't end the way we wanted it to. We had a fabulous game against NC State, and then a not so fabulous game against Notre Dame. The first 25 minutes of that game were about as bad as Duke can play. I think most people would agree about that. Sam, why don't you give me your reflections, your thoughts on the ACC tournament?
I felt really good after we beat NC State. That's my impression of the tournament. No, the NC State game was more or less a clinic in how to put away a team in the first half, and I felt great that night about where we were headed that weekend, and I thought that we'd be able to do the same thing to Notre Dame, but I mean, the shots weren't falling. It was all the things that Duke can do to lose a game, starting with making only 3 out of whatever it is, 17 of your 3-pointers. That's how you beat Duke is let them shoot threes and miss. And Notre Dame did that. And then on the other side, we couldn't stop their penetration. We couldn't stop their ball movement. So I hope that it is a learning opportunity for the guys. We had that tough Virginia Tech game towards the end of the season, but we still won. And sometimes the losses are good because they rattle everybody a little bit and say, hey, look, these are the things that we do wrong, and we can do them wrong enough that they can cause us to lose a game, not just play a close game. So I'm hoping that the Notre Dame game provides us some context for things that the team can improve.
I like that. Was very well stated, sir. Donald, what about you?
Yeah, the same thing. I think with the NC State game, it was kind of a throwback to the Duke Duke games when I was in college, where we start out hot, we put the team away early, and everybody got to play. It was basically a perfect game. And I think with Notre Dame, it was a struggle all night. Anytime we tried to get some sort of run going, even when we got it down to 4 points, they were able to just hang on and put it away. And I think Jerry Grant and Pat Connaughton were ridiculous in that game. Just not necessarily with stats, but with just how they performed and how they kept the team in it. And every time something seemed to go our way, they were there to kind of steal the momentum right back. I think the key in that game was that they went to the line 25 times and made 22 of them. And we went to the line 14 times and only made 7 of them. So there's your ball game right there. We need to improve the free throw line, and we need to stop this penetration that is either letting teams get good shots or getting them to the foul line, which our opponents are hitting way more free throws than we are.
I wanted to add before we came back to Jason, our last ACC tournament victory was in 2011 against UNC, and it was a three-peat. We won in 09, 10, and 11, and then we haven't obviously won it since then. So it was my senior year of college was the last time we won it.
I believe it's the first. I believe it's the first time in ACC history that this conference has gone 4 straight years without a team from the state of North Carolina winning it.
Oh wow, yeah, I believe that.
Well, yeah, if you look at the ranks of the teams that have won the ACC tournament, it's basically Duke, UNC, and then a huge drop off to NC State, and then the entire rest of the conference combined is like less than NC State. The tournament has been dominated by the state of North Carolina, or more specifically, it's been dominated by the Triangle. No offense, Wake Forest. Love you guys, but it's been the Triangle that has dominated the ACC tournament until lately, obviously. My reflection, my thoughts in the ACC tournament, obviously the NC State game was a ton of fun and great, and we're all really worried about Marshall Plumlee turning pro after his performance in that game.
Yeah.
MP3 coming.
Sorry, U.S. Army.
Oh yeah, exactly. MP3 coming to join his brothers in the pay for play league. But on the Notre Dame game, there were a couple points in that game where I would check the box score while the game was going on, and I would say to myself, if we were hitting even not a good, but just an average number of our outside shots of our 3-pointers, we would have the lead, or it would be a very close competitive game. It would have changed the complexion of the game completely. And instead, obviously, we kept on shooting, and that's what we're supposed to do, and we kept on missing, and that's not what we're supposed to do. An abysmal game from the perimeter. On the other hand, here my takeaway is Notre Dame's a great team. Notre Dame's a 3 seed in the tournament, and I think Notre Dame has an excellent chance to make it all the way to the Final 8 and give a real scare to Kentucky. And in fact, I've been talking for several days with friends of mine that I really hope. I knew Notre Dame was going to be the number 3 seed in the Midwest. It was like it had to happen that way. I knew that Duke and Virginia would be in the East and the South probably, and that meant it made sense for Notre Dame to be in the Midwest. That's where Notre Dame is geographically, preferred to be from. And I'm so looking forward to it. I really hope it happens. Kentucky and Notre Dame is the ultimate matchup of a team that shoots from the outside and plays on the perimeter against a team that does nothing but go inside and plays, in the paint. And I just think it's the contrasting styles. It's the best defensive team against arguably the best offensive team. What a amazing matchup that'll be, and I'm really looking forward to it. But the reason I reflect on the NCAA tournament as I'm talking about this is I got way off track. So Tyus Jones and Quinn Cook, who arguably been the best backcourt in the country, certainly over the past month or so, that was Quinn Cook's worst game of his entire senior season. There's absolutely no question about that. 2 of 12, 1 of 8 from 3. That was Tyus Jones's worst game in 2 months. It was, among his 2 or 3 worst games of the year. He had 4 turnovers, 5 assists. He was 4-13, only 1 of 5 from 3. Frankly, Justice Winslow for the first 25 minutes of that game looked like he didn't want to be there. That was as poorly as he could possibly play. He was turning the ball over. He wasn't, being aggressive or trying anything on offense. On defense, he looked absolutely disinterested. With the exception of Jahlil Okafor, there isn't a single guy on the Duke team who played not even an average game for the most part against Notre Dame. And yet, it was a 4-point game with 2 minutes to go against a 3 seed, against one of the best teams in the country. And to me, that takeaway is, man, even when this Duke team is awful, even when we're shooting as bad as we can from the perimeter, we've got our 2 guards playing as poorly combined as they can all year, we're still right in it. And really, it was some bad free throws. If Big Ja hits those 2 free throws when we were down 4 points with a minute and a half, 2 minutes left, I think Notre Dame's in panic mode at that point, and Duke's probably going to win the game.
And both teams at that point were battling foul trouble. So everyone was very nervous about the way they were playing defense and not playing as aggressively as I think either team wanted to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing to point out for Notre Dame is, by the way, they got a career game from Bonzie Colson. Bonzie Colson won't play that well ever. I don't think so. So sort of not everything going right, but a lot of things going right for Notre Dame. Almost everything going wrong for Duke. I mean, look, how often is Notre Dame going to hit 88% of their free throws, or 22 of 25? And that's what it took for one of the top teams in the country to beat Duke. I think that's a really good sign. Look, I wanted to win the ACC tournament, but in the end, my takeaway is this Duke team is going to be an exceptionally difficult team to beat, an exceptionally difficult out in the NCAA tournament, because we saw our worst, and it took one of the best teams in the country playing one of their better games to beat us. You guys think I'm crazy?
No, I think
I agree with
right
it.
on about that.
Yeah, all right.
Before we move on from the ACC tournament, I just wanted to point out that this is the last time we're going to be in Greensboro for the next 5 years. So I hope that nobody feels particularly attached to it, because you're not going to see the Greensboro Coliseum anytime soon. However, next year, Donald, the ACC tournament is in your backyard, so I expect you
the party's at my
representing
house
for us there. Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah,
we'll be.
It's going down.
It's in Washington next year, and then at the Barclays in Brooklyn the 2 years following that. So this is the weird expansion of the ACC that we're seeing as it happens.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sam, about us not being in Greensboro after this. I will certainly miss the place for the next several years. But I look forward to Donald being in your neck of the woods. That'll be a lot of fun up there in Washington. You got a bed for me, right? I can crash at your place, yeah?
Oh yeah, it's going down. We're gonna have a block party.
I love it.
Can't wait.
I love it. Sounds good. Hey, guys, as we do every week, it's time for our player of the week. We had 2 games, Notre Dame and NC State. We were just talking about them. Donald, why don't you tell me who's your pick for player of the week this week?
My player probably comes as no surprise. It is Big Ja with his 28 points against Notre Dame. I thought he was awesome in that game, as he was for most of the week. And I think he was far and away our player of the week.
Sam?
I know that he wasn't exactly productive against Notre Dame, but just for his enormous performance against NC State, I'm going to give it to Marshall Plumlee, who, let's be real, he's not getting a lot of Player of the Week nominations. So I'll throw him the bone this week for his impressive dunk display all over NC State on Thursday night.
And I am agreeing with you. I'm also giving it to Marshall Plumlee. I wanted to give it to Big Ja. I probably should have given it to Big Ja, but you know what? He's won quite a few of them. And Marshall, what a wonderful fun situation that was for him. Nothing but slam dunks. I think it was probably incredibly demoralizing for NC State to see them just getting their butts kicked by a guy who averages like 2 points a game. Really great for Marshall, and a big salute to the future Armed Services member, Marshall Plumlee, as he wins my player of the week. Guys, before we go, Final Four picks. We got to have Final Four picks, right? No question about
Absolutely.
it. Sam, who you picking, who you like, and I don't want to hear your eventual national champion. I just want to hear your Final Four.
All right. So in the South region, I like Duke.
Really?
I think
You're going out on a limb there, huh?
I think we mentioned that there are some tough matchups in there that could happen. But Duke's the strongest team in that region, and I expect us to come out of there. In the East, I just don't trust the Big East. So I'm taking Virginia, and in an enormous ACC homer situation, my Elite Eight in the East is a Virginia-NC State matchup. So there you go, Wolfpack. I think you're going to the Elite Eight this year. In the Midwest, I picked Kentucky. I know, shocking that Kentucky might be able to outlast Maryland and Notre Dame, although, as Jason mentioned, the Notre Dame game should be interesting. And then in the West, which I think is the most interesting region, I have Baylor beating Wisconsin and coming out of there. I think that one of those Big 12 teams is going to show up, and I think it's going to be Baylor.
Donald, your turn.
So I've been taking a look at it, and I reserve the right world to change my picks at a later date. However, the way I see it right now, out of the South, I'm with Sam. I like this Duke team. I don't know. I haven't heard much about them this year, but I think they're poised for big things. So I look to see them in Indianapolis. In the East, I'm going to go out on a real limb, and I'm going to say Louisville emerges from that bracket and goes to Indianapolis, which would create a very interesting situation because in the Midwest, shocker here, Kentucky, that would create a very interesting matchup, not only on the court, but in the stands in Indianapolis with both of those fan bases joining Duke. In the West, I've been watching this Wisconsin team a lot this year. I thought they, I thought they, did very well in the Big Ten tournament, and I see them finally getting that bracket and getting to Indianapolis. So I got three chalks. I got Kentucky, Duke, Wisconsin, and then the sleeper Louisville.
I like you for picking a sleeper in the South. I'm going with SMU. No, of course. I'm going with Duke. I'm picking.
Is SMU getting Emmanuel Mudiay back?
Yeah, right. Hey, if they did, they'd be really good. They'd be lethal.
That would change things a lot.
That still would not change things enough for me not to pick Duke this year. I love what this team's been over the past month and a half, and we're going a long way, including to Indianapolis. Quinn's going to get at least that one banner and hopefully another one. Up in the East, I like Virginia. I think that the extra week off is going to allow Mr. Anderson to get a little bit better and get his hand fixed. And I think when he comes back, people forget how good they were. They were really, really good. And I really like Virginia coming out of that East bracket. In the Midwest, God, I want to pick Notre Dame. I really want to pick Notre Dame. But I'm picking Kentucky because I'm boring like everyone else on this planet. I do, by the way, think that the winner of the West Virginia-Maryland game will give Kentucky all it can handle. Both those teams, I think, have the kind of athletes that stay with Kentucky, won't be intimidated by Kentucky. And I think that once Kentucky gets past them, I absolutely think they will be playing Notre Dame. I think Kansas is a shell of what it was earlier in the season. The Kentucky-Notre Dame game is just going to be a great game. That's like the single game I'm looking forward to more than any other in this bracket, but I think Kentucky wins it. And then out West, I'm picking Arizona. I like Arizona. I know the Pac-12 was down this year, and I don't have much respect for any other Pac-12 team, but I think Arizona has some pretty good athletes. I think they match up well. I think Wisconsin may have some trouble with North Carolina, who I think they'll get in the Sweet 16. And then I like Arizona. I think Arizona may have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder as well because they feel like they could have been or should have been a number one seed, and they're out to prove something. So those are my picks. Am I crazy? Should I have taken Notre Dame?
I don't
what do you think,
so.
Guys? Should I have taken Notre Dame? I should have taken Notre Dame, shouldn't I?
It would be bold, but also potentially quite foolish. I wanted to circle back because you brought up one interesting game. There were a couple interesting second round matchups that I wanted to highlight that potentially will happen. The first that you mentioned was West Virginia, Maryland. Not only are those teams both very strong this year, but the schools sort of secretly, not secretly, but maybe
they hate each other.
Like nationally known, they really don't like each other. I am from the state of Maryland. They do not like Duke, but they really don't like West Virginia either. And when they play in football, the Morgantown and College Park are like the riot capitals of the country. So that would be a ferocious game. In the same region, you have a potential second-round matchup between Wichita State and Kansas for the Battle of Kansas. And that is a game I believe that Kansas manages to dodge often. And they don't like playing Wichita State because they know that Wichita State's good. But that is a very potential second-round game. And then on the other side, the Michigan State-Virginia potential second-round matchup, I think, could be the best game in the tournament. Michigan State has played really well recently. They almost took out Wisconsin today, and so they are playing with all the confidence that we expect from a Tom Izzo team in mid-March. And obviously Virginia is now going to have Justin Anderson back and hopefully healthier than he was in the ACC tournament. So I look for that game to be a really good matchup that's going to happen in Charlotte, hopefully across from a game that we're going to play against San Diego State or St. John's.
I love this. This is kind of fun. We should go around and highlight some other games that we think are really interesting, compelling matchups. Let me do one really quick. How can we not talk about North Carolina and Harvard? Tommy Amaker coming back to play North Carolina. I unfortunately think Harvard, to me, Tommy's done a great job of getting athletes and getting players there that can really, to some extent, overwhelm the other kind of guys they face in the Ivy and allow them to compete athletically with a higher tier of school, of program, I should say. I really think they're going to have their hands full with Carolina. I think the Carolina size inside is just something that Harvard's going to really, really struggle with. I'm not sure who Harvard has who's going to have much hope of stopping Bryce Johnson, but I love that matchup, and God, I hope Tommy wins it. Because Harvard's won a game in the tournament 2 years in a row. I mean, can you imagine if they actually got it 3 years in a row? I mean, there are plenty of big time programs that haven't won games 3 years in a row. Donald, you had one you wanted to talk about, I think?
Yeah, so I think probably the most interesting matchup in this tournament is one that to this date has never happened. And it's the fact that Dayton will be playing in one of the play-in games on their home floor against Boise State. And I feel like if I'm Boise State, I'm really, really angry at the fact that I'm playing Dayton on their home floor. Traditionally in the NCAA tournament, you don't play in your home floor. You have to go away, and you see that a lot, especially with if Syracuse was in the NCAA tournament, for example, they wouldn't have been placed in the East because they host the East Regional at the Carrier Dome. So Dayton, if they get past Boise State in the play-in game, they get to play Providence in Columbus. So they get to travel maybe 2 hours to play their second round game a couple of days later. That's a huge advantage, and I'm really interested to see how Dayton performs tomorrow on their home floor. And then if they get past Boise State, which is also a tough team, look for them to beat Providence in Columbus. That's my pick.
Ooh, I love it. That's some good stuff. And by the way, I agree with you. When I first heard, I was listening on the radio actually when they were announcing the brackets, and some of these guys on ESPN were talking about the fact that Dayton was getting to play in Dayton. At first, they were confused. They were saying, wait a second, that means the game is being played in Dayton. Because Dayton isn't actually playing there, is there? Are they? And then, it sort of slowly dawned on them, and they were irate. And I agree with them. The NCAA tournament is not for home games. These are neutral site games. I don't think we've ever seen a home game in the NCAA. It's certainly not in 20, 30 years that I've been really, really paying attention and watching this thing.
And this is the only situation I think where it can happen because they schedule all the play-in games for Dayton, and there's no contingency plan for it. So if the NCAA decides that Dayton is one of the last four in, they have to play at the Flyers Arena for those play-in games.
So let me ask you then, guys, do you all think should they have switched Dayton with, say, UCLA or Texas, who are the other 11, some of the other 11 seeds that weren't in play-in games? Should they have?
Well, it's debatable that UCLA should have been in the tournament at all.
Texas as well. Texas is a classic example of a team that played a really, really tough schedule, played a lot. They faced some of the hardest teams in the country, and they didn't beat a single one of them. What is Texas?
They were basically Clemson this year, right?
Yeah.
There's a piece of me that thinks, with a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge, they should have found a way to not have Dayton play in Dayton. And I wouldn't have had any problem at all if they'd switched them with with Texas or UCLA. And if I'm in Boise State, I'm furious. I am absolutely livid that they did this to me.
And that's not a casual trip from Boise to Dayton.
No, it's not. It absolutely is not.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, I remember Villanova was hosting the East Regional at Wells Fargo Center, which is traditionally where they play the majority of their games. And I recall that year they played almost all of their games on their smaller on-campus gym, which I think seats about 7,000 fans. They played almost all of their games there so that they would be eligible to play in Philadelphia at the Wells Fargo Center should they have been drawn in the East. And I thought that was one of the only times I've seen a team actually do a workaround that way, kind of a loophole. But no one has, I don't think to date, since this tournament has expanded to neutral sites, I don't think anyone's played on their home floor other than Villanova in the tournament.
And when you say that Villanova is a host in Pennsylvania or in Philadelphia, they're listed as a host along with I think the rest of the Big Five schools. So it's a little different than say Syracuse being Syracuse is the only host at the Carrier Dome. When they play NCAA tournament games there, they put Syracuse's logo sort of on in the corner of the floor, I think, and nobody else's. But I think in those NBA arenas, if it's in Philadelphia, it's being hosted by all the Big Five schools, and if it's in DC, it's being hosted by like Georgetown and GW and whoever else. So yeah, I remember that coming up that there's it's only if you play a certain number of games at that site does it technically become your home floor, and it doesn't actually matter if you're listed as a host. It matters that like Villanova only played like 3 games at that arena that year, so it technically wasn't a home venue for them.
Well, and the thing I would add to that is if you only played 3 games there, yes, you get the advantage of sleeping in your own bed and not having to travel too far, but you don't know the floor, you don't know the gym and where the dead spots are and knowing exactly how the sight lines look and like that, the way you do when you play 10, 15, 20 games on your home floor in a given year. So I don't have nearly as much of a problem with that as I do with Dayton getting an absolute home game on a floor that they know incredibly well, that they practice on every day.
Do you think that looking back, Brad Stevens wishes that he had scheduled more non-conference games at Lucas Oil in 2010?
That's a good question. That's an interesting point. Would the last second
Hayward would have known those sight lines? He would have had it down pat. He would have made
exactly.
Everything would have been different. Yeah, who knows? I mean, obviously they weren't going to play extra neutral court games at the Colts arena, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think he's pretty satisfied with how things turned out for the Butler program. Anyway, so that pretty much wraps it up for us here on the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Sam and Donald, thanks a lot, guys. We had a good time talking about the NCAA tournament. And the start of the NCAA tournament, I should say. We will be back here next week at this time. Fingers crossed, we'll be talking about who Duke faces in the Sweet 16. We don't want to presume anything, but obviously, as you heard from listening to us earlier, we like our chances. Gentlemen, any quick parting thoughts? Are we ready to go?
I'm so excited.
This is the best time of the year. Just cancel the rest of this week. I'll be watching basketball.
Amen. I completely agree. Although, I say it with a little bit of bittersweet feelings about it, because even though I'm so excited for the tournament as I am every year and as great as it is, we also know there's only one more L, and there's only 3 more weeks or so of college basketball left. It's in that regard, it's really sad, and the tension that mounts with the possibility that we could be watching some of our favorite players play for the last time, at least in a Duke uniform. I hate that part of it. Can we have a second tournament? Can we have the April Madness? Let's have a second tournament in April. What do y'all think?
They'll have the do they still do that North Carolina schools pro-am thing at the end of the season?
Yeah, that ain't the same.
Yeah, well, I realize that, but you can still see the guys playing together in a much smaller gym and not with all the high stakes and the emotion. But no, I agree with you. It's sad, and especially because we know that this year not only do we have such a great leader in Quinn Cook graduating, but it looks like a number of our underclassmen are going to also be leaving early, as we've had the last couple of years to pursue their pro careers.
Yes, but let's hope it's a few weeks away at least. Let's hope we have
Absolutely.
3 more weeks at Three more weeks at Duke basketball.
Indeed.
That's what I'm looking forward to. Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we will let the Duke marching band take us home from here, and check back in with the DBR podcast. We'll be right back talking about the tournament at this time next week. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.